on the drive, pulls back, lost the ball, got it back, kicks it out. White, corner three, bang! Derek White puts up another three. Back of the room won't go. Holiday the offensive rebound. Now the Pacers have to foul. Brown has it. Final seconds. That's it. It's over. The Celtics are heading back to the NBA Finals.
The Boston Celtics are back in the NBA Finals for the second time in 4 years. They've also made 6 conference finals in the last 8 years. So today we're going to take a look at how this Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum Boston Celtics team was put together. This postseason, I've already done videos on the Timberwolves, Pacers, and Dallas Mavericks and how those teams were built and created. But today we're going to take a look at the Celtics. Those teams have 1 championship combined. Boston has 17 championships in its franchise history, so it's not going to be in as depth on the franchise history as those previous videos were. But let's start with Bill Russell. The winningest player in NBA history, Russell won 11 championships in 13 years in Boston, ranging from 1957 to 1969. He was one of the greatest defensive players of all time and anchored those great teams with guys like Bob Cousy, Sam Jones, Tommy Heinsohn. Later in the dynasty, the Celtics would add John Havlicek, who would have the iconic Havlicek stole the ball moment and help bring the Celtics lots of championships, and continue on the Celtics dynasty ranging into the 70s after Russell retired. They also had Dave Cowens, who won a regular season MVP, and JoJo White, who won the Finals MVP in 1976 against Phoenix. The Celtics won 2 titles in the 70s before transitioning into the 80s era with Larry Bird. The 80s would see Boston go up against the Los Angeles Lakers many times and was maybe the greatest NBA rivalry of all time. The Celtics would also have finals matchups against the Houston Rockets, beating Moses Malone in 81 and Hakeem Olajuwon in 86. Obviously, Larry Bird was the star of this team and one of the best players in franchise history, but the Celtics had lots of other good players on their team in the 80s. They had guys like Robert Parrish, Kevin McHale, Dennis Johnson, who had already won a championship, Danny Ainge made up this iconic core. The 1986 team would be one of the greatest of all time, as they would go 67-15 and win the title. After Larry Bird retired in 1992, though, the Celtics wouldn't win another playoff series for a decade until they made the Eastern Conference Finals in 2002 with Paul Pierce and Antoine Walker. Pierce would have some good years on his own, but it wasn't until the 2007-2008 season that things were finally back on track for Boston. The Celtics would finish with a 66-16 record after putting together a big three of Ray Allen, Kevin Garnett, and Paul Pierce. They also saw Rajon Rondo take a huge leap this year, pretty much making it a big 4. The Celtics were finally back on top when they beat the Lakers in the 2008 Finals. Paul Pierce was Finals MVP after averaging 22 points, 6 assists, and 1 in-game poop. After losing to the Orlando Magic in 2009, the Celtics made it back to the NBA Finals in 2010 and once again matched up against the Los Angeles Lakers. This time, Kobe Bryant and the Lakers got the better of them and would take the series in 7 games. Even after losing Ray Allen to the Heat in free agency, the Celtics still had a good team in the 2011-2012 season. They even got up 3-2 on the Heat in the conference finals before LeBron would have one of his greatest games of all time in Game 6 and lead the Celtics past the Heat and back to the NBA Finals. As Pierce and Garnett started to get old, the Celtics would try one last time in the 2012-2013 season, but they would lose in the first round this time to the New York Knicks, and this would be the last game Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett would play for the Boston Celtics. In the 2013 offseason, the Celtics would start the rebuild and make one of the greatest trades in NBA history. They would send an old Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, and Jason Terry to Brooklyn for Gerald Wallace, Keith Bogans, Marshawn Brooks, and Chris Humphries. If you're wondering how that's an all-time great trade, the Nets also threw in 3 future first-round picks and a 2017 first-round pick swap. The 2014 draft pick, the Celtics would select James Young. The 2016 first-round pick would end up being number 3 overall, and the Celtics would use it on Jaylen Brown. Yeah, not great. And the 2017 first-round pick would end up being number 1 overall, but the Celtics would trade back to number 3 and select Jason Tatum. So yeah, not the greatest trade if you're Nets fans to get a couple years of old KG and Paul Pierce. But like I said, that 2017 year was a pick swap, so the Nets got the Celtics pick and drafted Kyle Kuzma out of Utah with pick 27. They would end up trading him and Brook Lopez for Timothy Mozgov and D'Angelo Russell, and they did get one All-Star year out of D'Angelo Russell, so not the worst thing in the world for them. But then that 2018 first-round pick, the Celtics would actually trade to acquire a future Hall of Fame point guard. So yeah, sorry Nets fans, that was not a good trade for you. This offseason, the Celtics would hire Brad Stevens from Butler as their head coach. They ended up missing the playoffs after going 25-57. It's the only time since that 2007-2008 season the Celtics have missed the playoffs. Since they were so bad, in that 2014 draft, they had a top 10 pick and used it to select Marcus Smart out of Oklahoma State, who would be on the team for years to come as a leader and good player for them. In the middle of the 2014-2015 season, the Celtics would trade away their former championship point guard in Rajon Rondo, getting back a few role players like Jay Crowder, Jameer Nelson, Brendan Wright. They would also make a trade for Isaiah Thomas, who would end up being a two-time All-Star as a member of the Celtics. The Celtics only gave up Marcus Thornton and a first-round pick, and they were able to acquire Isaiah Thomas, who was able to be the focal point of the offense for the next 2 years. Standing at only 5'9", Isaiah Thomas was doubted a lot throughout his NBA career, but in Brad Stevens' offense, he was able to have some of the best years of his career and helped the Celtics even make the playoffs this year when they were supposed to be a rebuilding team. They would end up losing in the first round to the Atlanta Hawks, but it was still a success based off of their expectations. In the 2016 offseason, the Celtics added two key pieces to their roster. They signed Atlanta Hawks big man Al Horford to a 4-year, $113 million contract, and with that third pick in the draft like we mentioned earlier, they selected Jaylen Brown out of Cal. That year, with a 53-29 record, the Celtics would finish as the number 1 seed in the East. They would beat the Bulls in the first round of the playoffs. In that second round, they would get forced to 7 games by former Celtic great Paul Pierce and the Washington Wizards, but they would take out the Wizards in 7 and advance to the Eastern Conference Finals. In the East Finals, they would once again match up with LeBron and the defending champion Cleveland Cavaliers. During the stretch, there really wasn't anyone getting past LeBron in the East, and the Celtics were taken out in 5 easy games. Thanks to that KG Paul Pierce trade, the Celtics had a chance at a top pick in the draft, and in that year's draft lottery, they were rewarded once again as they ended up with the number 1 pick in that 2017 draft. They knew the Sixers wanted Markelle Fultz, so the Celtics were actually smart and traded back to the number 3 overall pick, and they were still able to get their guy in Jason Tatum while also acquiring future draft capital. The Celtics definitely knew what they were doing, as Tatum would be without a doubt the best player in the class and a franchise player for the Celtics for years to come. However, the Celtics weren't done adding to their team. Kyrie Irving would request a trade from the defending Eastern Conference champion Cavaliers, and the Celtics would throw their hat in the ring, trading Isaiah Thomas, Jay Crowder, and the last pick from that Nets trade, a 2018 draft pick, to the Cleveland Cavaliers and acquire Kyrie Irving. At the time of the trade, Isaiah Thomas was dealing with a pretty serious hip injury that not a lot of people knew about. Unfortunately for IT, this would somewhat derail his career as he would never really be the same. The Celtics would also make a big splash in free agency, signing Gordon Hayward to a 4-year, $128 million deal and reuniting him with his college coach, Brad Stevens. Unfortunately for himself and the Boston Celtics, Gordon Hayward would suffer a gruesome injury on opening night in the 2017 season. He would break his ankle in the first quarter of his Celtics career. Kyrie Irving would also go out with an injury later that year and miss the entire 2018 playoffs. Lucky for the Celtics, they had a couple guys step up, mainly Terry Rozier in that first round series against the Bucks.
Push the ball, Drew Bledsoe, he loves to push the ball.
Scary Terry didn't even need to know the name of the guy that was guarding him, as the Celtics would move past the Bucks in 7 games. In that second round series, they would be matched up against Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons, and the Philadelphia 76ers, but the Celtics would get the better of them, taking the series in 5 games. They would move back to the Eastern Conference Finals and once again be matched up against the Cavaliers, but this time without Kyrie Irving on the other side. Tatum would have a huge moment dunking over LeBron and showing that he had a lot of promise, but 2018 LeBron was just too much for anyone, as the Cavaliers would take the series and move back to the NBA Finals. In the 2018 draft, the Celtics added Robert Williams out of Texas A&M with the 27th overall pick. In the 2018-2019 year, the Celtics had Kyrie Irving and Gordon Hayward back from their previous year injuries, so now the expectations were higher. They had made it to the conference finals last year, and now they were getting back 2 all-star players. They would sweep the Indiana Pacers in the first round and show that maybe they could go on another deep postseason run. But in the second round, they would run into Giannis Antetokounmpo and the Milwaukee Bucks. Giannis and the Bucks would take the Celtics out in 5 and virtually end the Kyrie Irving era in Boston. In the 2019 NBA draft, the Celtics would end up with 4 draft picks. They had 2 first-round picks, and they would take Romeo Langford with the 14th overall pick and Grant Williams with the 22nd pick. Kyrie Irving was a free agent, but just a year earlier he had assured the Celtics crowd that he was staying.
In Boston, you guys will have me back. I plan on re-signing here next year. Boom! So.
Lie detector determined that was a lie.
Irving would not stay, however, as he would team up with Kevin Durant on the Brooklyn Nets. To replace him, the Celtics would trade Terry Rozier to the Charlotte Hornets and get back All-Star Kemba Walker in the trade. Walker would make his 4th straight All-Star appearance in his first season as a Celtic, and Jason Tatum would make a big step from year 2 to 3, upping his points per game average from 15 to 23 and being named to his first time as an NBA All-Star. The Celtics would match up with the Sixers in the first round of the playoffs and sweep the Sixers, who were dealing with injuries during that series. In the second round, the Celtics would take out the defending champion Toronto Raptors, albeit without Kawhi Leonard, who had left to the Clippers in the previous free agency. But anyways, they still made it to the conference finals and got matched up with the Miami Heat, but would end up going down in 6 games to Jimmy Butler during that bubble playoff run. In the 2020 draft, the Celtics would once again have 2 first-round picks. With their number 14 selection, they drafted Aaron Nesmith, and with the number 26 selection, they took Peyton Pritchard. They would also acquire Luke Cornett in a trade midseason to add some big man depth. In the 2021 playoffs, they would be matched up with the Brooklyn Nets in the first round, and this would be the first time in the Jason Tatum playoff era that they would lose in the first round. Boston's public enemy number 1, Kyrie Irving, would get the last laugh as the Nets would take out the Celtics in just 5 games. In the 2020 offseason, a familiar face would return to the Celtics. It would bring back Al Horford in a trade from the Oklahoma City Thunder. Al Horford had bounced around the last couple years in Philadelphia and Oklahoma City, and I may have forgotten to mention it, as a Sixer fan I've tried to block out that Al Horford era from my memory. They would trade Kemba Walker and a future first-round pick that would actually turn out to be Alperen Sengun, but it was still a good trade for the Celtics as they moved off Kemba Walker at the exact right time when his body started breaking down. The Celtics would sign sharpshooter Sam Hauser as an undrafted free agent in that year's draft, and mid-year they would make a trade for Derek White, sending former lottery pick Romeo Langford, a future first-round pick, and a future first-round pick swap to the San Antonio Spurs. The 2022 playoffs were a year of revenge for the Celtics. They were able to match up against a few teams that had knocked them out in the past few years. Their first-round series, they saw the Brooklyn Nets and were able to sweep them, with Jason Tatum kind of having a standout performance and standout series taking on Kevin Durant in those 4 games. In the second round, they were matched up with Giannis and the defending champs, and while Giannis was awesome in that series, the Celtics were too much and were able to take the series in 7 games. This led to another Celtics-Heat conference final matchup. This time, the Celtics would get the better of the Heat in 6 games, moving on to the NBA Finals. Overall, it was a pretty successful year for Boston. Ime Udoka had a great first year as a head coach. Marcus Smart was Defensive Player of the Year, which was pretty uncommon for a guard in this era. The Celtics would get matched up against the Warriors in the NBA Finals. Jason Tatum would have a pretty bad series, but overall it wouldn't really matter because Steph Curry was just unbelievable in this matchup and definitely had a signature moment in the finals as the Warriors beat the Celtics in 6 games. In the offseason, there would be some drama in the Celtics organization as Ime Udoka would be fired for, well, I'm not really going to get into it, but Joe Mazzulla would take over as head coach. 2022 was definitely the year the Celtics moved to the next stage of team building. They had already traded away a few young players and draft picks for Derek White, and they did something very similar in a trade for Indiana's Malcolm Brogdon. They would trade Nesmith and a first-round pick to the Pacers for Brogdon to add him to the backcourt of Derek White and Marcus Smart. The Celtics would finish the regular season as the 2 seed and get matched up against the Atlanta Hawks. Trae Young would extend the series a couple more games than the Celtics would like, but Boston would still move on in 6 games. In the next round, they would get matched up against the Philadelphia 76ers. Philadelphia would actually take a 3-2 series lead in this, but in Game 6, Jason Tatum would answer back in a huge way, hitting a couple of big threes, and then in Game 7, he was able to finish them off with a Game 7 playoff record, 51 points, to lead the Celtics to the Eastern Conference Finals. After making it through Philly, Boston became huge favorites against an 8-seeded Heat team who almost didn't even make the playoffs, barely making it out of their playing game against the Bulls. But the Heat found some sort of rhythm in that 2023 season as they would take a 3-0 series lead against the Celtics before Boston would storm back, winning games 4, 5, and even 6 on a last-second shot by Derek White. Unfortunately for the Celtics, on that first play in Game 7, Jason Tatum would twist his ankle, and Boston would go on to win Game 7 and move on to the NBA Finals. In the weeks after the season, Boston would show that they were not content with their current team and ready to make big moves. They would trade for Kristaps Porzingis, who was with the Washington Wizards, and give up the heart and their soul of their team in Marcus Smart. Bringing in Porzingis was a little risky as he had dealt with a lot of injuries over the past few years. Elsewhere in the East, the Milwaukee Bucks would make a big splash when they traded for Damian Lillard to pair him up with Giannis Antetokounmpo to make a statement as a contender in the East. They would trade Drew Holiday to Portland to make this happen, and Portland didn't want to keep Holiday as they were about to go through a rebuilding phase. So Boston rounded up Rob Williams and Malcolm Brogdon and made a deal to acquire Holiday and bring him in as that defensive stopper for this team. Many wonder if Milwaukee would even do that trade knowing Holiday ends up on the Celtics. Boston would also sign Jaylen Brown to the largest contract in NBA history, giving him 5 years and $304 million. A lot of people criticized this contract, but the Celtics knew how important Jaylen was to their future. The Celtics would go 64-18, good for the best record in the NBA, and be matched up with a familiar foe in the first round. They would go up against the Miami Heat, who would be missing their best player. This would become a trend throughout the 2024 playoffs for the Celtic opponents. Boston would take care of what's in front of them, though, and beat the Heat in 5 games. Miami would steal 1, but they were really no match, as Boston would win most of the games in dominant fashion. Their next matchup against the Cleveland Cavaliers would be very similar to their opening round series. Boston would give away Game 2 in one of those games that kind of frustrates Celtics fans because they just keep shooting threes, don't drive to the basket, and are unfocused on defense. But when this Celtics team is on, they're on, and they were the rest of the series. Even with Donovan Mitchell missing a few games at the end, the Celtics had no problem as they took out the Cavs in 5 games. In the conference finals, those first 2 games, they got really battle-tested against the Pacers. Jaylen Brown had to hit the biggest shot of his career to keep Game 1 alive, and the Celtics would win in overtime. Game 2, Tyrese Halliburton would suffer an injury, which you never want to see for anyone that's looking for a competitive series, but the Celtics just had to play the team in front of them, and that's what they did in Game 3 and 4. Guys like Andrew Nembhard, Pascal Siakam, Miles Turner still gave the Pacers life in those last couple games, but Boston would just be too much without Halliburton for the Pacers, as the Celtics would take the series as a sweep and move back to the NBA Finals. Jaylen Brown would win Conference Finals MVP, and I'm happy for him because he's a guy that's had a lot of criticism over the last few years. The Celtics, in fact, have all had a lot of criticism, as this team has been talked about a lot with high expectations. Especially Tatum and Brown, who are only 26 and 27 years old respectively, but this seems like it may be the last step in the process for them to win the title. There's a quote by Albert Hubbard that says, "The final proof of greatness lies in being able to endure criticism without resentment." And I think the Celtics just might be there. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think of this Celtics team down in the comments. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.